Hey guys, and welcome back to
Water Wars. All right, Kendall. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about
let's introduce ourselves.
I'm Kendall. And I'm Brielle.
And we're not history majors.
No, I'm a biology major.
And I'm psychology pre-OT, but
We're learning about water, and so we're going to tell you something about a war that involved no fighting.
yeah, it's just a water war.
It was a war over water access
Yeah.
and water rights.
Yeah.
And whether or not that access should be a privilege. By human nature, we should have the right to that water.
So this is just what we've learned, and we're going to pass on our knowledge to you guys.
Yep.
Brielle, do you want to start us off?
We're going to be talking about the California Water War. So there was this area of land in central California called Owens Valley, and the Owens River runs right through the valley. It's pretty much an oasis of sorts. It's very green, and there's a lot of plant life. In the beginning of the 20th century, there was a really strong ecosystem there in both the river and in Owens Lake.
Everyone wanted access to it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's California, everyone's struggling, everyone wants access to it.
You have like two sources of water.
Yes. All right, so water flowed down from the Sierra Nevada mountains into little streams and, of course, the Owens River. Now, water always flows from the lowest point, so it eventually trickled into the Owens Lake.
So Owens Lake had a really high salinity level, meaning that it's super salty. So it was really too salty to be used for anything productive.
But, I mean, can't they just, take the salt out of the water?
I mean, in theory, they could.
It's just too much. It was, in a really extensive process.
Yeah.
And it costs a lot of money.
Yeah. And because basically, once the water flowed into Owens Lake, it couldn't go anywhere. And the water was evaporating, but the salt was just sitting in there.
Yeah, staying there.
And there wasn't a lot of, there wasn't an expansive, ecosystem there.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of, microorganisms.
So at this point, it's the beginning of the 20th century, and farmers around the Owens Valley had primary access to the water because it was, right beside them. They were a lot closer to this valley than Los Angeles was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so since they were so close to this river, they had fertile soil, and it was good for growing plants.
Yeah, they could have, large crops, and it was really good for agriculture.
It was beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. And so they were, super happy. And then you have Los Angeles, who's not doing so well, and they were parched. Not to mention, this was really when droughts started hitting California really hard, especially in the area surrounding LA, so in Southern California. And that was making the city even more desperate for water. So the people of Los Angeles were complaining, and eventually the complaints reached the mayor of Los Angeles, Fred Eaton. So Mayor Eaton needed some help in order to do this, so he called up his old friend William Mulholland, and they had previously worked together for the Los Angeles Water Company, and then after Eaton was elected mayor, he founded the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and Will was employed as a superintendent and the chief engineer there. So Mayor Eaton needed to address the lack of water in his city, and he knew the only way he could do this was to bring water in from somewhere else. So just some background on Will Mulholland. He was pretty much a genius in the water engineering world. He was born in Ireland, and he migrated to America. He migrated like the geese.
William Mulholland equals geese. He is a goose, people. He sprouted his wings and he flew from Ireland to America to start a water company.
Yep, that's exactly
how it happened.
Yeah.
Look it up in the textbooks.
It'll be there.
Yes, exactly.
So anyway, he came to America in the late 1800s. He was pretty much self-educated, and he worked a large variety of jobs before meeting Fred Eaton and started working on engineering products in Los Angeles.
So, Will and Fred are together one night. They were discussing this huge issue on the water shortage in the city. And Fred said something along the lines to William, talking about how he had a water issue and he didn't know what he was doing and he needed help. He didn't know if the city was going to survive, if they couldn't find water anywhere. So he was like genuinely concerned, like he just was elected mayor. Like he's supposed to be the one leading this town, taking care of it. And we don't have any water. We need to do something about that.
Exactly. So then Will replies, well, yeah, it's an issue because I need to, drink water,
Yeah, obviously.
And as well as other people in the city.
Kind of every human ever. Every living thing
what?
ever.
Really? No.
Every human needs to drink water.
Oh, right. I forgot about that.
But you forgot about humans needing to drink water.
It's a minor.
Just a little slip of the brain.
Yeah.
Forgot about that. Yeah, that's okay.
I just grab a drop every once in a while.
Once a week. That's it.
But neither of them knew where they were going to find a source with enough water to provide LA with water for everyone. So with this in mind, Will set out to find the significant source of water that would see LA through their very long dry seasons. And soon he set his sights on Owens Valley, which was about 230 miles north of Los Angeles. So Los Angeles is kind of on the coast, right, of California.
I'd say more towards the coast than Owens Valley was.
Yeah, and Owens Valley is central, on the border of Nevada. So yeah, it was about 230 miles away from Los Angeles, and they decided to use this as their water source. And they started to create a plan to build a gravity-powered aqueduct from Owens Valley to Los Angeles, which means that the whole thing would have to flow pretty much downhill in order for that to work.
From the beginning, they faced a lot of obstacles getting off him.
He was one of those people that he got mad about anything that was, in his way.
He was, very selfish, only cared about what would benefit him.
Yeah.
Power hungry,
So I read this thing where, basically, he made a bunch of money off of building this aqueduct for people. And I don't remember what the exact numbers were, but, he made bank, building this aqueduct. I mean, not only was the city super happy, but, he made a lot of money off of it.
Did he, put any of the money towards the city?
No.
But, yeah, that's my boy, Fred. That just sounds like the type of guy that Fred is.
He's a quality man.
I'm sure.
So the Bureau of Reclamation was this new organization in the Southern California area, and basically they had promised the farmers around Owens Valley to help improve their irrigation systems and bring more water in from the Owens River.
So Eaton traveled to Washington and met with President Theodore Roosevelt's advisor.
He wasn't good enough to get
He was not that important to me with old Teddy Roosevelt, but he did meet with his advisor. So whenever he did talk to his advisor, he was pleading for Los Angeles to have the rights to use Owens River.
And basically the only way that this was going to work is that he told President Roosevelt's advisors that the river would be more profitable flowing into LA than it would be used for irrigation to the farmers around the valley.
Which honestly makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it is more important to have the water run.
Well, I feel like you're looking at it from an agricultural versus industrial sense where
True.
LA needs it for industry, as well as survival.
Yeah.
And then the farmers are using it for agriculture. But you also a lot of
the agriculture went to the city.
Went to the city, exactly. So
they just needed a better way to almost divvy up the water, who was getting how much. Because I feel I don't know. I feel like everyone could just kind of find a way to conserve rainfall or something. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, I feel like Fred was also an all or nothing. He wanted all of the water, and he was not willing to share.
He would not.
So
be the type
I feel like that's where a lot of the root of this conflict was.
Yeah. He was just power hungry and selfish, and he didn't want to share with anyone, and he only cared about benefiting himself.
To be fair, he chose a water source that's almost 300 miles away from him. So,
that's true. I kind of forget, how much 300 miles is. That's...
Yeah. I guess it's, 230, but that's still a lot. I think it took them almost, 10 years to even, start the project because they had to deal with the Bureau of Reclamation, go to the Capitol, and then also they had to find funds for that. Like, that must have cost a lot of money for the workers and the supplies and everything.
Forgot that it took that long. Like, that is such
Yeah.
a long time. Like, can you imagine being...
Yeah. And by the time it's finished, you're
like hearing about this thing for 10 years and then it finally happens.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a lot of things nowadays. It's like flying cars. Like, how long have we been talking about flying cars?
Yeah, true.
Be like, I'm telling you what, man, whenever I have kids, to be like, no, you have to learn on the ground first.
Yeah.
Then you get to learn in the air.
Yeah.
Like, do you know how funny that would be?
I know.
Like, back in my day, I had to learn how to drive on the ground.
I know, it's crazy. Okay, so after they handled the Bureau of Reclamation, Fred Eden started purchasing the land from the farmers that lay in the path they intended the aqueduct to run from Owens Valley to Los Angeles. And some of the farmers were very easily persuaded to sell their land, and then others held off for a long time, and those ones ended up making a lot of money because there was such a need for the land to be purchased in a certain amount of time that they were kind of just like, we're going to give you whatever
money.
you want.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're like, we're going to give you whatever you want. Just give us your land.
So after about 10 years, they finally began construction on the aqueduct. So I believe the budget for the project back then was around $22 million, which I think in today's term adds up to be about $600 million, something like that, would you say?
Yeah, with inflation and everything, it's quite a sum of money.
In the budget, that included materials, labor wages, stuff like that.
They had to build an actual, like, cement plant. So this was really extensive and almost revolutionary for a project of this type at the time. And in order to talk about this, I wanted to bring someone in that could speak about it a little bit more intellectually than I could. And so
Then we
have
both could, let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, in reality, neither of us are engineering.
We don't build aqueducts for a living.
No. I mean, I like slurp water out of straw. I cannot wait to listen
You
to this
slurp
later.
water out of a straw, so that gives you a basic understanding of what an aqueduct is.
Yeah, it's a vacuum, gravity, same thing. It's fine. For this segment of our podcast, we will be joined today with Mike Duer, and he has a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Gannon University, and he currently works as the Chief Engineer at the Red Valve Company in Carnegie, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for joining us today. So the first thing I wanted to ask you was, previously we discussed how Owens Valley, where they were getting the water from, was about 230 miles north of the city of Los Angeles. And this seems like a really long distance when you think about it, but is that typical of a project for an aqueduct?
When you're talking about an aqueduct system, 230 miles is large. I think the largest and longest aqueduct I've heard of is the California aqueduct, which is over 400 miles.
They transported a lot of materials as well as the men by mule. And then they also had these machines called Caterpillar tractors. I guess most sophisticated technology were these electrically powered dredges. So that was the early 20th century. What kind of technology would they use nowadays to build a project similar to this?
Right. Most advancements we've made is in hydraulic equipment. So we've gone from hand tools to power tools to steam tools. Now we're at hydraulic types of tools. Now can generate much more force.
It took them about like 5 to 7 years to build this aqueduct. Would that have been considered fast based on the type of machinery they have?
Absolutely.
I read that one of the biggest challenges they faced was that they had to build numerous amounts of tunnels, and they varied in length, but altogether it was about 43 miles. From what I understand, they would build the tunnels by drilling and digging into the earth, and then they'd build these wood frames to support the earth around the tunnel itself,
Right.
and then place the pipes inside. If they wanted, like if something happened to a pipe inside one of these tunnels, would it be pretty much impossible to like replace that part of the pipe or
there's been
repair
things,
it?
even with the Los Angeles aqueduct, they've even had times during the operation of that system where sections of the pipe would collapse. And in that case, there's no redundancy. There's no secondary path for the water to flow, so it has to be shut down and the problem has to be corrected. So things like that, it used to be lined with wood which was good. Then they made developments to actually line the tunnels with concrete, which is a much longer sustainable material that can last hundreds of years.
Gravity was what pulled the water from Owens Valley down
Right.
to Los Angeles. And do most aqueducts use gravity,
Absolutely.
or are there other kinds of power that can be used?
The basic types of energy you can use to move fluid are gravity, and then it can be pumped. But with aqueducts, that's the advantage of having a water source higher than the destination sources. You can utilize gravity, and it's free.
There was one part of the aqueduct that ran through an area called Jawbone Canyon, and I think it was the steepest slant they had to build up. The pictures of it is a pretty significant hill. Now, I know you have water coming down the other side of the canyon, which would probably help push it up. Like, are there other things that play into that?
Well, one interesting thing with a canyon like that is water seeks its own level. The aqueduct has to be sloped downward to provide a continuous flow. As long as on the downstream side of the canyon, that's at a lower elevation than the upstream side. That's called an inverted siphon.
How would the water still flow if it's really flat?
The pipe cannot go level, because if it is level, there is no downward grade to drive the flow and continue to flow down towards the destination. Right. So that's the important thing when you're looking at aqueducts, to find that source that is a higher elevation.
Are there any significant environmental impacts that coincide with a project like this, as far as actually building the aqueduct, and then typically found like on the ecosystems of the water source itself?
The biggest thing with the Los Angeles aqueduct was the aqueduct is it drained and it dried out the raw water reservoir in the lake. The problem with that is that turned to dust, and it created air pollution when there was high winds. One of the things they really focus on is endangered species. So if these pipelines are going through a, say, forest or what have you that have endangered species.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And it was really a pleasure getting to talk to you about it and learn more about aqueducts.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, so that was really cool that we got to have that interview with Mr. Duer and get a greater understanding of how aqueducts work and how they've transformed over the years, and how we use them now, and how they're built now, and how they function now versus 100 years ago when they were using it in the California waterway.
Exactly. So now that we kind of have that understanding of it, we can talk about the implications of this aqueduct on the ecosystem in California, where it was, and also the farmers that were using the water, what kind of implications this had for them. So we can see that by 1926, Owens Lake, which is where Owens River flowed into, was drying up due to the fact that so much of the water was being diverted towards Los Angeles. And Los Angeles was, as time went on, they were using more and more water from Owens River and not taking water from their other kind of secondary sources. So this was meaning that even more water is being taken out, so it was drying up even more, and it just kind of started to snowball.
Yeah. And this really upset the farmers, and there were often frequent attempts to destroy the aqueduct itself in order to restore the lake and its ecosystem to a viable, sustainable state.
Right. So I think there was one point where I read that they even tried to, like, blow up part of the aqueduct so that they, like, couldn't repair it.
Where would these farmers get a stick of dynamite from?
I don't know. I just imagine them, like, crawling up and being like, no.
I know. I picture it to be like some like funny little cartoon that they like light it and they'll like run away and then it's like a dud and then like they start walking back to relight it and then it explodes and it's like
exactly.
But that's just how my brain works.
I mean, same. So yeah, this caused a lot of problems for
not
Los
only
Angeles,
the city but also Fred Eaton.
Yeah, because he's the mayor, so he has to kind of handle these tensions in the city itself and then also in the counties kind of surrounding LA that were being affected by it.
think everyone just kind of is turning to him as the mayor to help fix the situation, and he's,
Yeah.
would you say, panicking? Or-
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, the people in the city are being affected by the farmers because they're no longer able to produce that the quantity of agriculture that they were before the aqueduct was built. So they're being affected by that, and then, you know, people are starting to lose their jobs because they were like workers on these farms, and the whole thing is kind of getting complicated.
It's becoming full circle now.
Yeah, exactly. So Fred Eden started a project to repair and maintain the aqueduct, especially after the farmers tried to destroy some of it. And he wanted to do this to create jobs for local workers, to help kind of calm the tensions.
So by 1928, they had purchased around 90% of the water that came from the Owen Basin.
Right. So they now own like the majority of land that this water flows through, and the farmers are, if you think about it, they have 10% of that land.
Yeah.
Among all of these farmers who all need a significant amount of water for their personal like agriculture. So then, you know, things subsided for a while, and then in 1970, Los Angeles builds a second aqueduct because they need even more water because things are continuously getting drier around Los Angeles, and they need to bring in more water from somewhere else.
Yeah. So now groundwater was also being pumped out of the Owen Basin, and the spring started to dry up. And as a whole, it was becoming very detrimental to the ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, if you don't have water, you can't have life. And it's a cycle. So they need each other to continue in a prosperous way.
Big word. Prosperous. If you think about it from the farmer's perspectives, if microorganisms can't survive, then the farmers are trying to sustain crops with a very small amount of water.
Yeah. So it's just not a sustainable process. It wouldn't work. So we get to this point where they've built 2 aqueducts and they're pumping all this water, and
now the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which operated the aqueduct, had failed to complete the environmental impact report, and an Inouye County sued the city of LA based on the grounds of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Yeah, so like Mr. Duer talked about in the interview, how there wasn't a lot of regulatory organizations when the first aqueduct was built, but it became a lot more prominent for these organizations to regulate projects like this later. So, yeah, basically they sued them because now there were all these rules and kind of requirements for projects like this that would have an impact on the environment.
So LA created a very short environmental impact report, which was rejected by the courts.
Yeah, I think they made 2, and both of them were rejected. They were basically like, this is not what we want, and this is not going to fulfill the requirements.
So in 1991, they signed an agreement called the Inouye Los Angeles Long-Term Water Agreement, requiring LA to manage the pumping of groundwater to avoid these environmental impacts.
And then later, they specified in this document called the Memorandum of Understanding that stated that the Owens River had to be rewatered, quote unquote, by June of 2003.
And this means that the Owen River had to be restored to a sustainable ecological state.
This ended up never really being fulfilled, and the groundwater is still being pumped out of the Owens Valley, and water from the river is still being pumped out at a very damaging rate. And this is kind of resulting in the valley is becoming desertified. Desertified? I don't know.
Sounds right.
Basically, it's losing its ecosystem. It's becoming very dry and arid.
Like a desert.
Like the desert, right?
Hence the name. So, like dehydration in a person, after so long, the valley is just not going to be able to continue rehydrating itself enough to sustain its own ecosystem and supply LA with water.
Yeah, and the whole situation is just really sad, and
just everything's affected.
Yeah.
And nothing can, once this was done, it can't be undone, and it's never going to be to its I don't know, I guess fullest potential that it
Yeah,
once
it's
was.
never going to get back to its original.
It's never going to be
state.
fully restored. Like,
Yeah.
it can get close and it can improve, but it's never going to be as good as it originally was.
Exactly. I think this kind of brings to mind a whole conversation of, like, rights and privileges, and I know we've talked about this a lot.
Like, who has the right to the water,
Yeah.
or is it privilege to everyone who has control?
Yeah, is the privilege based on where you live, or if you get there first, or if you're just the bigger man, you know? And then you also have to think about the ecosystem. Like, there's organisms and there's life that depends on that water, and they almost have a right to it as well. And we depend on those ecosystems to sustain our lives. So the whole thing is just this whole cycle of who gets what, and
It's the circle of life.
it's a circle of life, exactly. So yeah, it's still an ongoing issue, and they're still trying to discern how they're gonna deal with it now. And like we said, it's drought and lack of water in California is becoming a really big issue for them.
Even in today's news, we're still seeing the same types of problems that caused this war 100 years ago. There's
It
still
is.
a shortage of water. There's still
Yeah, like over the
fighting
summer,
over rights.
forest fires and
And forest fires have been all over the news lately.
yeah, they're a huge issue for California, especially this past year. And it's because everything is so dry, it just catches on fire so quickly. I know when we lived in Colorado, and every summer there was a firework ban because, you know, the 4th of July, no one set off fireworks or anything because if you did, there would be a forest fire and just tons of smoke. And it's a huge issue. Like, yeah.
Like,
I think-
California is just always struggling.
Don't they call it like the 100-year drought or something like that?
Probably. I mean, and we've had rain for a good, like, week here.
Yeah.
So I feel
I'll
like,
just give them some.
honestly, like, we have enough rain. We can spare some, I think.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely. We'll just give them
My
buckets.
shoes are soaking wet.
Yeah, I know.
We've had enough rain. It's literally been a week long.
I know.
We have had enough rain. I think we can move.
And we'll leave you with that.
Yep.
And so thank you so much for joining us today. And
Thanks for tuning in. Feel free to listen to any of our other podcast water related on this website.
yeah. And I hope you guys come back and join us again.
Another episode of
Water Wars.